All right, let's dive in. We're taking a deep dive, ready, into some ancient wisdom here. Deuteronomy chapters 17 through 21. We're going to be talking about Moses giving all these laws, all these rules to the Israelites. And this isn't just, like some old rule book. It's kind of like we're getting a sneak peek into how an entire society, like the blueprint for a whole society, one built on some pretty powerful principles.
Yeah. And, the thing about these texts is that, these ideas are from thousands of years ago, but they still resonate. They still resonate with us today. And they really get you thinking, how we approach things like justice, leadership, even what it means to have faith today in the modern world.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so let's jump into it. Chapter 17, it starts off by talking all about sacrifices. And it's not just like, hey, just throw whatever on the altar, call it a day. It's not like that. Moses is very, very specific that you have to offer the best.
Yeah.
The top shelf stuff, no blemishes, no compromises. It's like, I don't know, isn't even really a sacrifice if you're sacrificing something less than your best.
Well, that's it, right? It's like, are you really committed, or are you just, going through the motions, checking a box? And, that idea applies to way more than just, ancient rituals, right? I mean,
Right.
think about all the sacrifices, the sacrifices that we make today, like our time, our energy, the things that we pour our hearts into, Are we giving our best to those things? Or just the leftover?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, if you're not all in, are you really even sacrificing?
Yeah.
But Moses, he doesn't stay on sacrifices for long. All of a sudden, we're talking about justice.
Yeah.
And he sets up this whole system where you need multiple witnesses in order to convict someone, like a serious crime. You need at least 2 or 3 people to agree. It's almost like it's a safeguard against just like, jumping to conclusions.
Yeah, it really speaks to the need. It speaks to the need for solid evidence, for a fair process. Now, whether or not that specific system would actually like hold up in a modern courtroom, whether that's debatable. But the core idea here, which is to protect innocent people, protect them from hasty judgments. That's something that we still grapple with today, big time.
Yeah.
I mean, think about our legal system, our legal processes, right?
Yeah.
Gathering all the evidence and cross-examining the witnesses. You got to build a case. We've come a long way, but the goal is still the same. Make sure that justice is served.
That's a good point. It's this whole focus on justice, though, it takes a really interesting turn, I think, in Deuteronomy 17. Yeah. Because Moses starts giving all these guidelines for how to choose a king. And it's not what you would expect. He says that the king has to be chosen by God, right? Chosen from among the people. And get this, they're specifically warned against, like hoarding wealth and wives. Like what? So many restrictions. You would think a king would want all the riches and power they can get their hands on.
Right. It's almost like they're trying to get ahead of it, right? Like a preemptive strike against that corrupting influence of power. And the concern seems to be that the more a king has, right, the more they're going to be tempted to cling to it, to put their own interests ahead of the needs of all their people.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're saying, look, the minute you start focusing on all your own wealth, your own pleasure, you're going to start losing sight of what really matters, and that's serving your people.
Yeah. Wow. That is a huge, huge contrast with how we view success today. Like we often equate leadership with wealth and power.
Right.
I mean, are we missing something here by valuing those things above humility and service? Would a king who took a vow of poverty even be taken seriously today? I don't know. Right. Really makes you question our priorities.
It does.
Doesn't it? But moving on, we're introduced to the Levites in chapter 18. And they have this, totally unique role in Israelite society.
Yeah.
They don't inherit land like the other tribes, but they're supported by the entire community.
Yeah.
And they're totally dedicated to spiritual matters. Just imagine having God as your inheritance. That's a pretty radical concept.
Yeah.
It's like saying true security, true purpose is not found in material possessions. It's found in your relationship with something bigger than yourself.
I like that. So it's like, don't even think about getting a psychic reading in ancient Israel, huh?
Makes you wonder what Moses would say about all those online personality quizzes. But okay, I mean, seriously, it's like a powerful statement,
Yeah.
about priorities. And then And then right after that, we get this whole list of things that are totally off limits, spiritually speaking. Divination and sorcery and like trying to talk to the dead. It's like they're saying, put your trust in God, not in unreliable or dangerous practices. What would be the modern equivalent of those forbidden practices, do you think?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I think that the underlying point, the point that they're trying to make here is about, where you seek guidance from. It's about seeking guidance from a source that you think is trustworthy and true, but who or what that source is, well, that's for each person to decide. And speaking of guidance, that's a perfect segue into the prophecy that we see in Deuteronomy 18, where Moses predicts that there's going to be a future prophet, just like himself, and that prophet is going to speak God's word to all the people.
So even when things are tough, even when things are uncertain, there's this promise that there's going to be continued guidance. But then that kind of raises the question, how do you know who to trust?
Yeah.
How do you even recognize true guidance with all the noise out there? And that's where things get even more interesting as we head into chapter 19.
It's really interesting, this whole idea of guidance, of knowing who to trust. It actually kind of plays out in chapter 19 when we start talking about these cities of refuge.
Cities of refuge. Okay, I'm listening. What were those about?
Okay, so picture this. You're out in the woods, you're chopping some wood, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden that axe head, it flies off and it hits someone. And well, it's an axe and it's totally tragic. But in ancient Israel, even an accidental death, it could lead to this whole cycle of revenge killings.
Oh, wow.
So that's where these cities of refuge, that's where they came in. They were like these safe havens for someone who had accidentally killed a person.
So it's kind of like a way of acknowledging that bad things happen sometimes, even if there's no bad intention behind it. It makes me think about how our modern legal system, how it tries to separate intent from action. Like, we have manslaughter charges,
yeah,
right? versus premeditated murder. But even today, it's not always so easy to know the difference between those things. What about crimes of passion or situations where mental illness is a factor? Things get really complicated really fast.
Totally. Yeah. Deuteronomy, I mean, it doesn't really offer like specific solutions for all of those really complex modern situations, But it does give us a framework for how to think about justice and mercy. How sometimes, you feel this like pang of sympathy. You feel it even for someone who's done something really wrong. Do you think that maybe that's kind of like a remnant of this ancient idea of separating intent from action?
That is a really interesting question. It really makes you think about how much of our modern sense of justice, like how much of it is actually rooted in these ancient principles.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got these cities of refuge, right? They're offering safe haven to the accidental killer. What happens next on this Deuteronomy journey?
Well, chapter 20, it takes a little bit of a turn, and this is not for the faint of heart. We're going to war.
Oh boy.
But even in the middle of a battle, right? There's this really strong emphasis on faith, on
right.
Trusting in God. The Israelites are told, don't be afraid, because God is fighting right there alongside you.
So it's not just about, military strategy and brute force. There's a spiritual element here too.
Absolutely. And it's not just blind faith either. There are also a lot of really practical considerations. Like Moses says that the priests, they have to talk to all the soldiers, talk to them before the battle. They have to remind them that God is with them to boost morale. And get this, there are even exemptions for certain people. Like if you just got married or you planted a vineyard or you built a house, you're off the hook.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Imagine that, You get out of going to war because you just installed new kitchen cabinets. Pretty funny. But seriously, it really shows this very human side, to this whole war thing. It's like they're acknowledging that people have emotions and fears and commitments. Even if there's a battle raging on, it's not just about winning, at all costs. There's this recognition that people's individual well-being, it actually matters.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But I'm guessing that things don't exactly stay, lighthearted as we move into chapter 21.
Yeah, chapter 21. Well, chapter 21 dives into some more complex territory, definitely. And it can get kind of unsettling, to be honest. We start shifting our focus to like community responsibility. and family dynamics.
Okay, I'm ready for it. What kind of situations are we
Okay,
talking
so
about?
imagine the scene, right? Straight out of like some ancient crime drama. Someone's been found murdered, but there's no witnesses, there are no leads, no one has any idea who did it. It's a cold case, Israelite style.
Oh, wow.
And in this situation, the elders, the priests from the nearest town, they have to perform this very specific ritual. It's almost like a cleansing ceremony, you know. They're symbolically washing their hands of this unsolved crime.
So it's not about like hunting down the killer. It's more about the whole community kind of acknowledging that this wrong happened
Yeah.
and taking on the responsibility, even though they don't know who did it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like they're saying we as a community, you know,
Yeah.
we're responsible for justice. And if justice fails, well, we all share in that failure. It's a really powerful statement about how interconnected a community is, don't you think?
Yeah, it is. It makes you think about accountability, especially when the person who did it is unknown. Makes me think about how we try to address systemic injustices today.
Yeah.
You know, where it's really hard to point the finger at any one person or any one group. Do you see any parallels there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have these truth and reconciliation commissions, and governments, you know, they apologize for past wrongs, and then there's movements for reparation. I mean, all of those, you can see all of those as modern attempts to grapple with this whole idea of collective responsibility, to just acknowledge that harm was done, and to look for a path, you know,
Right.
a path toward healing, a path toward justice. But as we're going to see, this whole idea of community accountability, it takes an even more intense turn when Deuteronomy starts tackling a subject that might make some modern parents kind of squirm.
I think I know where this is going. Rebellious teenagers, right?
Okay.
So spill it. How do they deal with those unruly kids back in ancient Israel?
Well, let's just say that their approach to discipline, it was a bit more old school than what we might consider acceptable today. We're not talking about, you know, timeouts or grounding here. We're talking about a situation where if parents, if they couldn't control their child, you know, and we're talking about serious offenses here, not just, you know, talking back or sneaking out. We're talking about serious offenses. If the parents couldn't control the child, they could actually bring that child before the elders of the town. And in really extreme cases, well, let's just say that the consequences, they could be fatal.
Wait, hold on. They could actually be stoned to death for disobeying. That's pretty intense. I mean, I know that things were very different back then, but that seems really harsh, even by ancient standards.
It definitely highlights how different things are today, you know, like how different our approaches to discipline, to the parent-child relationship. But before we judge too quickly, it's important to remember the context, the cultural context. This wasn't about, you know, cruelty for its own sake. It was about maintaining order.
Yeah.
Maintaining order within the family, maintaining order within society.
So if a child was totally out of control, it was seen as like a threat to the stability of the whole community. Like their actions, they could have ripple effects beyond just the family.
Exactly. Yeah. Remember, this was a society where survival, it often depended on being united, on everyone cooperating. A rebellious person, a disruptive person, well, they could put the entire group in danger. It's very different from how we see things today. But it's a good reminder that even the most challenging parts, the most challenging passages in these ancient texts, well, they can offer some really interesting insights into the values, the beliefs that shape those societies.
It's a lot to process. It really is. But I'm curious, you know, what other social norms, cultural norms does Deuteronomy kind of explore here? What's next?
Well, we're getting into like chapters 21 and 22 now, right? And this is where things get really, really interesting, I think, but also pretty complex.
Yeah, you could definitely say that. I mean, we're entering some territory now that looking at it, you know, from a modern perspective, I think it's bound to raise some eyebrows, spark some serious conversations.
Absolutely, yeah. But like always, it's all about understanding, trying to understand the historical context, the cultural context. And while we're doing that, we're also trying to glean those timeless principles.
Okay, I'm ready. So what kind of sensitive topics are we talking about here?
Okay, well we're gonna be talking about the laws around war. and captives.
Okay.
So specifically, if an Israelite soldier, if he sees a captive woman and he finds her attractive, well, there's this whole process that's laid out for how he can take her as his wife.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that definitely sets off some alarm bells for me. And it sounds like they're basically condoning forced marriage or even something much worse than that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's totally understandable, to have that reaction. I mean, it totally clashes. It clashes with our modern understanding of consent and human rights.
Sure.
But we have to remember this text, it comes from a very different time, a very different culture. The norms, the understandings of warfare, they were so different back then.
So how do we even begin to wrap our heads around something like that? I mean, how can we make sense of this alongside everything else that we've been seeing in Deuteronomy, right? All this focus on justice and compassion and all of that.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge for sure. One way to look at it, one way to approach it is to try to understand the motivations. Like, what were the motivations behind this law?
Okay.
So some scholars, they think that it was actually meant to protect women, to protect captive women from even worse fates.
Okay.
Like sexual exploitation or slavery.
Right.
But then other scholars, they argue that it's just a reflection of how patriarchal, ancient societies were, that women were often seen as possessions.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even texts that we consider to be sacred, they can still reflect the complexities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even the injustices of the time that they were written in. It doesn't mean that we have to condone those parts of it, but it does challenges us to really think critically about how we interpret and how we apply, how we apply these ancient texts to our world, to our modern world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's such a crucial point. If we're gonna engage with these texts honestly, well, that means that we have to acknowledge the hard parts, the difficult parts, and wrestle with them, and try to understand them in their context, in their historical and cultural context.
Absolutely. It's not about shying away from the difficult parts, right?
Yeah.
It's about going deeper. It's about digging deeper and seeing what we can learn from them, even if they make us uncomfortable. So what else does Deuteronomy have to say, about marriage and family?
Well, chapter 22 goes into a lot of different laws about marriage, about inheritance, even sexual conduct. Like for example, there's rules about a husband. He's not allowed to divorce his wife if he falsely accuses her of being unfaithful before they got married.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So there's at least some attempt there to try to protect women from being unjustly discarded, or slandered.
Yeah, it seems that way. And there's also stuff about inheritance rights for daughters, especially in cases where there aren't any sons.
Oh, okay. That's pretty progressive.
Yeah.
For that time period, it suggests that women, well, at least in certain situations, they had some legal standing. Right.
Yeah.
And they weren't completely powerless.
Yeah, exactly. It really challenges that assumption that ancient societies, that they were just, across the board oppressive towards women. There were nuances, there were variations, and these laws give us a glimpse into those complexities.
That's fascinating. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Deuteronomy, what are some of the big takeaways? What should we be thinking about as we kind of close the book on all of this?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways here is just how challenging it can be, to interpret these ancient texts. We can't just like impose our own modern values on them, our own modern sensibilities. We have to wrestle with the historical context,
right,
cultural norms, and yeah, even the parts that we find to be problematic or unjust, and it's through that process of grappling with it all and questioning it and trying to understand. That's how we can really learn from these ancient voices.
And through that whole process, maybe we can even gain a deeper understanding, not only of the past, but also of ourselves,
right,
and how our own moral and ethical frameworks, how they've evolved, how they've changed over time.
Yeah, exactly. It's a journey of exploration, right? Not just a search for simple answers.
That's well said, yeah. And honestly, I have to say I've learned a lot